On today's show, college basketball is back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into 5 storylines you should tune into going into the season. And to start the show, we're going to go into MLB, wrap up the season. Houston Astros clinch the World Series tonight. We're going to cover all of that, World Series MVP, what we thought of that. And then to close the show, we're going to talk about the chaos that went down in college football this week. All that and more. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Share it with your friends. Leave a comment down below about what you think. Um, leave a 5-star rating and review on all audio platforms. And I'll cue the intro. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Imy Nixon. Today is November 6th, 2022. We're recording episode 135 today. And joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael. What's up?
Insane day in college football, and college basketball returns on Monday night, which is super exciting. We are back for another episode. It is currently 12:20 a.m. here Central Time, but it's actually 11:20 a.m. as the clock falls back an hour at 2 a.m. So we're all good, and we're here to talk hoops. But first, let's start by wrapping up what just occurred in Houston, as the Houston Astros win their second World Series in franchise history by defeating the Philadelphia Phillies in 6 games. They go 11-2 total in this year's playoffs, the only 2 losses coming in the World Series, as they swept the Mariners, they swept the Yankees, and they beat down on the Phillies, with the exception of like a game and a half. Game 1 where the Phillies came back from a 5-0 deficit, and then game 3 where they absolutely just, demolished the baseball inning after inning. But other than that, the Astros pretty much dominated the series. The Phillies set a record for 71 strikeouts in the World Series. That's a new record for any team in a World Series. And give credit to the Astros. They were the better team. That was pretty clear from the start. They should have won game 1, but things happen. Baseball happens. You saw later in the series that the Phillies defense started to rear its ugly head. They made some mistakes in game 5 that I think cost them. And the Astros were able to come up with timely hits. Jordan Alvarez tonight in the 6th inning was quiet pretty much the entire series. Was quiet in that Yankees series, but when it mattered the most, it was closing time. He hit the bomb to give them the lead, and by that time, the Astros had the stranglehold, as that bullpen was absolutely fantastic all playoffs and all season long. They had the lowest ERA during the regular season, bullpen ERA. Dusty Baker had 8 to 9 guys he could go to in any situation. We talked about this before the playoffs began. And Ryan Presley was nails. Ryan Presley and Brian Abreu, who was like the setup guy in particular, they were nails. And Brian Abreu is a guy that we're really going to watch out for moving forward, as I think he could eventually step into that closer role when Ryan Presley either leaves in free agency or retires eventually. He's really young, very good pitcher, very good story. After having a 5.75 ERA last season, he comes back and is nails for this bullpen. Those are my biggest takeaways. We knew the Astros were the better team all around. They were better on defense. They made the defensive plays when they had to. They got the timely hits when they needed to. They didn't strike out a whole lot. I mean, give credit to the Phillies for a great run. Bryce Harper still had a historic playoff run, and that I'm going to remember for a long time. He really cemented his legacy, even though he didn't win the ring. I think the Phillies have an opportunity to really get better this offseason where they need to. Now that they know they have a team that's ready to win, they can go for it, but they're in a tough division. The Astros, on the other hand, are in a division where they can really just keep this going if they're able to keep this core together. The main guy upcoming in free agency is going to be Justin Verlander. He signed a 1-year contract. Other teams had interest last offseason. We'll see what he decides to do. But if I had to guess, his heart is in Houston and he wants to finish his career in Houston. But man, Jeremy Pena, ALCS MVP and World Series MVP, hit 400 in the World Series. Just an incredible run for the rookie. So congratulations to the Astros as a Yankees fan. I'm happy for Dusty Baker. I'm happy for some of the newer players on their roster. And it was a joy getting to cover our first full baseball season on the Raw Prospect Podcast. And we'll be back at it soon. Free agency now opens this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So once that begins, if there's any big news, we'll be back talking baseball. But until then, we're going to focus on other sports.
Right. Yeah. First of all, I just want to give you credit because you nailed your prediction for the World Series. You predicted it being, back and forth with the momentum, and you also predicted Astros in 6. So kudos to you for that. And as for what I thought of the series, I mean, it was first of all, it was fantastic baseball all the way through. There wasn't really any moment where you were in any point, any of these games where you were like, oh, this team has it. It's over, blah, 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 blah. It kept you on the edge of your seat the entire series. Um, Bryce Harper was fantastic the whole World Series, stepped up over and over and over again. Uh, Kyle Schwarber as well was great for the Phillies. But ultimately, I think I'm right there with you. I think what won the series for the Astros ultimately was their bullpen. The offense was, you know, offense was going to come with how good their lineup is, but if their bullpen misstepped at any point in any of these games with how close they were, we'd be looking at an entirely different series here. And I look at particularly Game 4 when they were down 2-1 and things weren't looking very good. And that pitching staff combined for had a combined no hitter, and that's, I mean, there's not really much else you can say about it. I mean, it's just incredible pitching.
Top to bottom, the pitching is deep, and everybody they put into the game, they had trust in. Fantastic performance. I think a legacy-defining performance by Justin Verlander in Game 5, going 5 innings, only giving up the one leadoff home run. Shut it down after that to where let the Astros do their thing offensively. Jeremy Pena was great in that game. I think that's what gave him the MVP with his 3 hits, 2 of them RBIs, 1 of them a home run in that game. He was just fantastic the entire playoffs. I don't want to overreact to, one playoff run or one half of the season where he was fantastic, but I think you can tell. I mean, his Gold Glove, ALCS and basically the Astros' best, most consistent player offensively throughout the entire playoffs. That doesn't happen if it's
Right.
just like a fluke. So I'm so excited to keep watching him. I think we can start to group him into the group of younger stars that we have now in the game of baseball. Jordan Alvarez did it when it counts. Their bullpen was nails. They only gave up like 4 or 5 runs the entire playoff run, which is, insane. And they continue to just be a solid, all-around, well-rounded baseball team. So they deserve it. And now that whole, even though I still think that 2017 World Series championship deserves an asterisk by it, I think they validated what I think they validated themselves now. This was the validation that the Astros franchise was looking for. And now nobody can say shit because they've done it without cheating. They may have done it with cheating, but they've done it without cheating now. And so nobody can say anything anymore.
Right, exactly. And they've made it to the World Series and the ALCS consistently.
Right.
And that's no small feat in baseball because we both know in baseball it's extremely difficult to be consistent year over year over year. So
Exactly.
I guess I'll wrap it up for baseball for now. Um, let's get into this college basketball. That's the heart of this episode. We prepared a list of 5 storylines that to keep an eye on going into this college basketball season. Um, and starting at number 1, um, let's talk about the new coaches, specifically at the Blue Bloods. John Shire, um, Duke with Kyle Neptune replacing obviously the legendary Coach K. And then Villanova hired a new coach as well.
Right. Well, first of all, every year it seems like college basketball sort of sneaks up on you. Starting at the second week of November. This year we don't get the championship classic right away because this year the season begins on a Monday night. And obviously ESPN has the rights to Monday Night Football, and that takes obvious precedent over college basketball. But we will get at the end of this week um, Gonzaga against Michigan State on an aircraft carrier, which will be interesting. And then next week we'll get the championship classic, where you obviously know every year Kansas and Kentucky will match up, and then Duke and I believe Michigan State will also match up. Those 4 teams always play in the championship classic every season. So the defending champions last year, Kansas, the runner-up, Carolina's preseason number 1, just getting some housekeeping out of the way for everyone so that you know. Gonzaga's number 2. Houston, who was in the Final Four 2 years ago, is number 3. They have a great team coming back. And then we get into some more blue bloods with Kentucky and so forth. But that's just to give you guys an idea of where we stand right now, preseason. Now let's get into these storylines. Oh, gosh. Coach K,
All right.
obviously, we saw all last year retired. He wanted his guy, John Shire, who had been there a long time, on the bench as a primary assistant coach to take over. Shire's already done a great job recruiting. He's on the recruiting trails. 9 5-stars already in the recruiting. I guess 9 5-stars committed to Duke over the next 3 years already. So he's doing a great job recruiting, but he has a young team, and the ACC is going to be much improved this year. So my question for John Shire is going to be, can he put all the pieces together? We've seen young teams before. You can be as talented as you want in college basketball, but in a tough conference like the ACC, where Virginia is going to be better than they were last year, where Carolina might just be the best team that we're going to have seen in a long time, and where some other teams are on the rise, can they put it all together with this young group? Will they buy it defensively? That's another big question. And then will they have enough outside shooting? We can dive deeper into Duke's roster here later in the episode because we're going to talk about the expectations for each of these blue bloods. within the top 25. But I think for John Shire, it's pretty simple. Put the talent together, get it to mesh. It's easier said than done. Get them to buy in defensively. You got to play defense if you want to win national championships, at least somewhat. And then kind of eliminate the egos. And on the other side, we got the unexpected retirement of Jay Wright after a Final Four appearance last season from Villanova, and Kyle Neptune will take over. I think if you're Villanova, it's pretty simple. The program, as long as they can keep it up, by keeping these guys in-house and developing them for 2 to 3 years, keeping that culture together, I think they'll be just fine. However, the Big East is stronger this year. Creighton is the preseason Big East favorite. They have a lot of guys returning, and they have an argument with some of the guys that Villanova lost to have the more experienced, more talented roster. So if you're Villanova, it's really about focusing on beating Creighton and a couple of other of these scary Big East teams. But it'll be an interesting feel for Villanova because Jay Wright was beginning to establish himself as below Coach K, he was the next guy. He was the heir apparent as the king coach of college basketball. Final Four appearance, it seemed like every other year, consistently winning his conference, consistently winning the Big East championship, consistently getting to weekend 2 and weekend 3 of the NCAA tournament, and continuing to develop guys and put them in the NBA. So I think both guys have interesting respective challenges at their respective schools, with some younger talent, some younger rosters, having to put this talent together. But at the same time, these are blue bloods that we're talking about, and these programs, once they're built, they sort of run themselves. So if you're John Shire at Duke and if you're Kyle Neptune, you just don't want to do too much. You just got to control the egos and try your best to put this young talent together. It's easier said than done, but that's what's got to be done. But I'm not too worried at all about either of these programs.
Yeah, these programs speak for themselves. The history of these two programs. I think you can look a lot at what North Carolina was able to do with their new young coach, replacing Roy Williams. I believe it was 2 years ago, or was it last year?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, right? Yeah, he's gone in there, and they've just continued right where they left off. So, I think these two programs have to look to do the same thing, especially for a program like Duke. It has to feel a little bit different without Coach K in there. Decades over decades over decades of experience, but the I guess the foundation of the program that he built will still be there because those assistant coaches have been there. This is a guy that's been in house as well and knows knows the blueprint and knows what they like to do offensively and defensively. So I'm not too worried about either of these coaches, because for one, we know Duke will always have the talent. We always know Villanova will have the talent. And two, I really like Villanova's style of play in general because the way they get up and down the court and shoot the three ball is hard to stop in college basketball. We don't see a lot of high scoring teams that are also able to defend. That's really it feels like a one or the other type of thing in college basketball a lot of times. So as long as those things stay intact, I really see no reason for these two teams to fall off.
Okay, so with that, and we'll be touching on this a lot more as we get further down the road and into the season. But with that, we'll move on to our next storyline. Another blue blood, Kentucky. If you remember correctly, Kentucky was the team that jump-started St. Peter's Cinderella run in last year's NCAA tournament by losing that game in the first round to St. Peter's. However, there is some hope for John Calipari's team as they are one of the more talented teams in the country, and they return for the first time in a long time. The National Player of the Year opted to return for another year, Oscar Sheboy. So they do have some returning talent along with some younger guys. But my question is, with the COVID season a couple of years ago, with only 9 wins, missing the tournament entirely, and then with this early round exit to St. Peter's, how much pressure, if any, do you think is on John Calipari to win, particularly in the tournament, and with the SEC getting better? I mean, Arkansas, Auburn, Tennessee, the list goes on and on. With the SEC getting deeper as a basketball conference year over year, with some of these teams seemingly having more success in the NCAA tournament than Kentucky. With Kentucky's roster, which is built to win right now, how much pressure should be put on, or will there be on John Calipari to win, particularly go further in the NCAA tournament, in your opinion?
Well, I think it all really. I think it's the same as really any year. I think definitely in the tournament there will be the emphasis on how they do, but we all know that in the tournament it's any given day, right? So I think first and foremost, if they're playing good basketball at the right time, then the expectations will be higher, 100%. But um, that's what John Calipari's teams are known for. That's what they hang their hat on, being able to, even if they have a rough start, getting, getting their stuff together and, really coming together as a team in, late January, February, March when it matters. So to me, the regular season, um, especially early on, I wouldn't put too much weight on things, but definitely, later on, there is some question marks. Um, they need to, win a couple games in the tournament to kind of alleviate some of that tension there. But I do have a theory on Kentucky. I think because of COVID and what that presented, I think a lot of, 2-year, 3-year guys ended up staying for that extra year because of the uncertainty of everything that was going on. And because of that, I think some of those one and done teams really suffered from that because you had all the other teams really having that extra year of experience and that extra year of, I guess, expertise. I don't know. I don't think that's the right word, but either way, I think things will kind of even themselves out this year, having been a couple of years removed from this COVID saga in college basketball.
I think there's a certain level of pressure that applies to Kentucky's level of success in the NCAA tournament. I mean, this is a program, regardless of what you want to say, that should find itself at least in the Sweet 16 almost every season due to its
Right.
talent and due to its coach. John Calipari, a future Hall of Famer, no doubt in my mind, already has brought a championship to Kentucky, maybe even more. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's only one. He's been there a couple times, but I think he's only gotten one. But still, I mean, he's had way more success than a lot of these other coaches have. And I think just with the expectations within that program, and I think Kentucky fans would tell you this, there's some pressure mounting on Calipari to win in the NCAA tournament. Kentucky fans aren't going to tolerate this too much longer, these early exits in the NCAA tournament. Now, I understand that the COVID season, I get that. We had, I remember Duke missing the NCAA tournament as well that year. And we've had some cases in which blue blood programs like Carolina one year do not end up making the NCAA tournament. But when you get there and you have this much talent, you got to be able to win some games and get to that second weekend. If they can do that, then I think a lot of this pressure will be taken off. And they definitely have the roster to do it. I mean, Oscar Tshiebwe, returning National Player of the Year, had a dominant junior season. He returns for his senior year, 17 points per game, 15 rebounds per game last year. Was a walking triple-double, super fun to watch. He will be the anchor of this team, offensively and defensively. He had a minor off-season knee surgery, so he might be limited in a way in November, but this is not when it matters the most. You just got to have him healthy for January, February, and March. That's when you want to be playing your best basketball, when conference play starts, and then near the end, going into conference tournaments and going into the NCAA tournament, you want to have your team healthy. And I think some of the injuries last year hurt this team as well. But with Tshiebwe, Toppin, Jacob Toppin, Obi Toppin's brother, who's a breakout candidate, in my opinion, for one of the better players in the country this year, along with the returning point guard, Severe Wheeler, who has another year under his belt of experience, which is important, as point guard play is crucial in college basketball. That's a core right there that you can win with. And you surround them with these talented freshmen like Carson Wallace, the 5-star who's going to start the 2, like Chris Livingston, another guy, another highly recruited, small forward who's versatile and can defend. I think for Kentucky, your hope is, as a Kentucky fan, that with some of these returning guys, that core group of Tshiebwe, Toppin, and Wheeler at the point guard position, with another year of experience and possibly a chip on their shoulder after what happened at the end of last season, return with a vengeance, and these freshmen make an impact, especially on the defensive end. I felt like at points in times last year, this team was a little bit limited in their versatility defensively, and hopefully that improves with some of the incoming talent that they have. And I think they're going to be deeper with some of these freshmen that hopefully will make an impact right away off the bench. So they're going to be athletic. I think they're going to defend better. They're going to give you a variety of looks, and they're going to score definitely in large spurts. So, yeah, I mean, they're number 4 in the preseason AP poll. There are expectations that come with that. There are expectations that come with Kentucky in general, and that's why I'm talking about the pressure to win in the NCAA tournament, because Carolina is doing it, and these other programs like UCLA, Gonzaga, even some of the newer bloods like Baylor and Houston, Arkansas, keep going to weekend 2 of the NCAA tournament. And meanwhile, Kentucky, who you can argue has more talent than all those teams, just isn't getting it done and hasn't gotten it done the past couple of years. So that's all. Not that if they don't, I mean, Calipari has basically a lifetime contract at Kentucky. They're not going to fire him. But from within, in that program, I think there is a little pressure building with each successive year that they don't go further in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think with that, we'll move on to our third topic, which is we're talking conferences. So let's just have a conversation, just back and forth here, about who we think the deepest conference will be this year: Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and why that might be. So I'll start off. To me, it's possibly between the Big 12 and the SEC. I'm not counting out the Big 10 necessarily. I think with the Big 10 being such a big conference, I think the top to bottom level of play may not be there as much in that conference compared to the SEC or the Big 12. But I think if you're arguing that the high end teams like say a Purdue or a Michigan, um, I mean they're there in the Big Ten, 100%. They're always there. So to me, that's why I kind of lean towards those two. I mean, you look at the Big 12. I mean, year over year, uh, Texas has turned into a solid program. Baylor is a perennial, obviously winning the national title 2 years ago. They're, turning themselves into a perennial, threat. And then, of course, you have Kansas, who's um, their resume as a program speaks for itself. They've won the Big 12, what, like 14 out of 15 years, something like that, maybe more than that. And then it goes on and on. I mean, the depth in that conference. I didn't even mention Texas Tech, who had a national championship run a few years back as well. So the Big 12 is legit. And until proven otherwise, that's where I'm kind of at. But I am a little bit biased because most of the college basketball I do watch is in the Big 12 because I'm a Texas fan. So I'm interested to see what you think.
I think I give the benefit of the doubt to the Big 12. If you look at what the Big 12 has done the past 2 years, they've been the deepest conference, no question about it, the past 2 years. Although the SEC is on the rise, uh, the Big 12 top to bottom has been, in my opinion, the most competitive, best conference top to bottom. Although that's a little bit unfair because in the SEC you have more teams, so it's a little bit easier top to bottom to be more competitive because you have less teams in the Big 12. But at the same time, you look at what they've done in the tournament, and that's where I think they've really separated themselves. Texas Tech in 2019 getting to the national championship. That was a Big 12 team. And you had Baylor winning the national championship, and you've had back-to-back Big 12 national champions, Baylor and Kansas. And the way it's trending, we could have a three-peat. I mean, you look at Baylor and what they return under, I think, in my opinion, possibly the best coach in college basketball after maybe
Possibly, yeah.
like Mark Few at Gonzaga or maybe a couple other names you can name. I mean, he's
Maybe
doing
Bill Self.
maybe Bill Self. Yeah, exactly. Although Bill Self is suspended the first four
Right.
games of the season, but we'll get to that another day. Um, I think with Baylor winning the national championship, 2 years ago, still having that three-headed monster at the guard position. That's how they've killed you the past couple of years. Flagler is returning. LJ Cryer is returning. And then Keontae George, five-star freshman, they add him to this lineup with Flo Thamba at the big and Langston Love and others. I mean, they're a good team, and they defend. They have depth, they have talent, and they have veterans in guard play. I mean, they have the recipe to be the national champion this season once again. So does Kansas. Now, I do have a little bit of concern with Kansas. First of all, it's hard to go back to back, but the good thing is, although you lose some guys, you do return one of your better offensive players, or two of your better offensive players, DeJuan Harris and Jalen Wilson, who will keep his spot on the wing. And then you have some good transfers. Texas Tech transfer, Kevin McCullough at the 4. You insert him into the lineup. And then Grady Dick, which is sort of a funny name, but he is a five-star freshman who will is a sharpshooter from 3. He should give this team some extra boost from 3. There's a little bit of concern for me in terms of depth, as they did lose a lot of the returning minutes from this roster, as it's hard to keep it after a national championship. But with Bill Self and the way he mends this talent in this program in general, being as consistent as it is, they're always a threat. Texas, in year 2 under Chris Beard, returning some talent that I didn't necessarily think was going to be returning. Marcus Carr comes back in his second year in the system. Timmy Allen, who was arguably their best player last year, he comes back. Dylan DeSue, who missed a lot of time last year, but is a breakout candidate, especially with his defense on the interior and what he can do in the post. The transfer from Vanderbilt from 2 years ago, who missed time due to a knee injury last year, wasn't really fully integrated into the offense or defense as he was in and out of the lineup. He comes back. Christian Bishop, who was played really well at the end of last year, he comes back. So a lot of returning minutes here. We know that Chris Beard loves, at every school he's been at, he's built the program. They've gotten better year after year after year after year. And guess what? Today, in addition to the 2 5-star freshmen they have on this year's team, including Dylan Mitchell, who watch out to be freshman of the year, not only in the Big 12, but nationally. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. If you watch his highlights from the Arkansas exhibition game, where Texas won by 30, by the way. And then Arterio Morris, the 5-star point guard, who will back up Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter, the Iowa State transfer, who, by the way, was the Big 12 Freshman of the Year last year. I mean, this Texas team, if they can gel as they've played together for a season now, gel better earlier in the season, then I think, they're dangerous. And then you even extend beyond those top 3. I mean, I think those 3 are the cream of the crop, but Texas Tech, year after year, finds ways to do it. They have another talented team coming back this year. And then TCU is the sleeper team to watch. They're having a great year on the football, on the gridiron, and they might have one of their better teams in years in Fort Worth on the basketball court. So just watch out for TCU. And then I could even go on and on. So I think top to bottom, point being is they've proven it the past 2 years in the NCAA tournament with 2 national champions and teams that have gone far consistently. And I think top to bottom, they're the most competitive, best conference with the best teams. But that's not to say that the SEC isn't a close second. As you know, Kentucky, obviously, we already talked about them. But Auburn, Bama, Tennessee, who else is in the top 25? I'm looking at the rankings. Even a team like, A&M is on the rise. They're just outside the top 25. So I think some of the coaches in the SEC and some of the returning talent, I think the SEC is a close second, but I think the bottom of the SEC as a conference is a little bit worse than the Big 12. And then the Big 10 is an interesting storyline. They haven't had a Big 10. We haven't had a Big 10 national champion in over 20 years now. So that's an interesting, another side storyline to watch. But there are some teams in the Big 10 that I'd be on the lookout for. In particular, Michigan State can never count out Tom Izzo. Indiana is one of the teams that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then, there are some others as well. But I think my rankings right now, we go Big 12, SEC, Big 10, but the ACC is on the come up.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, moving on here to our second to last topic of the day. I have it listed as 5, but really it's 4. That was just a mistake on my part. Is the year of the big man? Question mark. We have a returning class of bigs across the country, and the question is, will that how will that impact the entire landscape of college basketball? First of all, and is it going to be where they just dominate the player of the year discussions, the conference, be on the teams for that winning conferences, be on the teams considered for 1 seeds, and so on and so forth. So what do you think?
Well, it's interesting because when it comes to the tournament, there are certain ingredients that you have to have to be able to win in a national championship and win consistently in the tournament. And when you think of college basketball, if you've been watching it at all over the past couple of years as it has evolved, um, it's really a guards game nowadays. I mean, if you don't have good, consistent guard play, uh, and if you're not deep at those positions, it's really hard to win a national championship. But at the same time, if you have a dominant big, like, and I'm going to get into the returning class that we have here in a minute because it is pretty amazing, um, then you can do your your options are just expanded all that much more, and you become such a more dangerous team. I mean, you look at what Carolina was able to do last year, what some of these teams have been able to do. They have that big guy in the middle, that anchor, both defensively, on the boards, and on the offensive end, where if you can get a guy who dominates on the interior, it makes your team that much better. If you look at this returning class, Armando Bacot, one of the better players in the country, returning to Carolina after last year with all their talent that they have coming back with R.J. Davis and Leaky Black and, you know, everyone else. I mean, basically they returned their whole team aside from Brady Manning, who was an important piece, but they returned pretty much everybody else, plus some five-star freshmen coming in. And then you have Oscar Tshiebwe, National Player of the Year, coming back at Kentucky. You have Drew Timme, once again, back at Gonzaga. You have Trace Jackson Davis, not a guy a lot of people are super familiar with because Indiana hasn't been all that great the past couple of years. But they have a good team now, and they're going to be dangerous, and he's really good. You know, I I could go down the list, but I do think, Hunter Dickinson at Michigan is another example. Zach Edey at Purdue is another example. I mean, there are on a lot of these elite teams that we think are going to be going deep in the tournament and contending for national championships. I think a lot of these teams are going to be run through their bigs. And I think you could definitely see. I think my pick for National Player of the Year is going to come from this group of returning bigs, just because of their experience and their dominance on the interior. But I think you're going to definitely see the impact of that. And I think the National Player of the Year, unless there's like a super breakout guard that we don't see coming, is going to come from that group. So watch out for all these bigs that you'll familiarize yourself with as the season goes deeper and we get to conference play.
Yeah. My pick out of that group is Drew Timme. Um, it feels like he's been at Gonzaga for 5 years, but he's produced year over year. He's gotten better year over year. And, a little bit last year, we saw at the beginning of the year, he was starting to take threes a little bit more. I hope to see a little bit more of that this year, possibly. And it'll be interesting to see this Gonzaga team, coming off a year where they kind of they weren't underwhelming in the tournament, but they didn't get the job done, to say the least. So I'm interested to watch that team and see how they do. Obviously, they're still in that Mountain West Conference. You can say what you want about that, but they're a threat each and every year as well. And then of course Oscar Tshiebwe, you can't go without mentioning him. And of course the big guy in North Carolina you had mentioned. I'm blanking on his name.
Armando Bacot.
Bacot, right? Exactly. Um, I really don't have too much to say. I mean, other than to win in the tournament, you got to have an inside outside balance. You have to have interior presence to win in the tournament because rebounding is so important. Points in the paint is so important. You can't just win just based off jump shooting. Well, sometimes you can if you're that hot that night, but not consistently. You got to be able to get those bunnies inside, especially if you're deep in the tournament facing those tougher defenses. So there's a good chance, one of these one of these players leads their team to a national championship.
Absolutely. And for further, and we have a comment actually in our live chat. We'll get to that in a minute. But we're going to hit on a lot of these other storylines as we go deeper and we get into the season. But if you want to familiarize yourself more with some of the returning talent that there is and some of the better players in college basketball, there's a great article out on CBS Sports.com where they rank their top 100 players in college basketball. And you don't even have to read the whole thing. If you read like the snippets on like the top 25 players, you'll have a pretty good idea from that point. At least you'll have some names in mind that you can look for and watch when you're watching these games. And if you're a subscriber to The Athletic, they did a series where they did the top 20 bigs in college basketball, the top 20 wings in college basketball, and then the top 20 guards in college basketball. So that's interesting as well. So if you want to familiarize yourself better with some of the names, because I know the name recognition, if you're not a huge fan like I am, can be tough. But over the course of the season, when you're watching these games, it might be nice to have a little bit of a background knowledge. So that way when you get to the tournament, hopefully your bracket doesn't get busted as early because you have that background knowledge. I'm just kidding. That really doesn't matter. But what's our final storyline?
Our final storyline is just touching on these blue bloods one more time. Particularly, I think you had listed Duke, a couple other teams. Let me pull it up.
I mean, we already talked about Kentucky. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We already had a big conversation about them. We'll be talking about this so much more. Let's mention
North Carolina, Duke, Kansas, UCLA, and Indiana.
Let's mention, first let's touch on Carolina. Then we can touch a little bit on Duke. And then we'll touch on Kansas and Indiana. Or no, let's save Indiana for another time. And let's touch on UCLA. Okay. North Carolina, they're returning 73% of their minutes from last year. Okay. This was, if you remember correctly, a group that was on the bubble at like the beginning of February, but ended up making a run. Hubert Davis obviously did a great job. This roster is proven. They're hungry. They're familiar with each other. They're familiar with their coach. And now they're hungry and have a chip on their shoulder after losing the national championship game. Armando Bacot, one of the better players in college basketball, center of this team, the heart of this team. Two really good guards, Caleb Love and RJ Davis, a really good wing defender, and Leaky Black. Northwestern transfer Pete Nance, who should do a fine job of filling the void left by Brady Manick. Puff Johnson, who emerged as a really opportunistic contributor off the bench last year, should get better this year. And then some of the five-star freshmen I mentioned, their guard Seth Trimble, and then Jalen Washington as well. This team is deep. They're experienced, a lot of returning talent, a lot of familiarity. In my opinion, they're rightfully ranked at the number one position in the AP poll going into the season. And we should see them make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, barring some catastrophic injury. So that's my take on Carolina. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's Baycott, and it's a mix of elite ball handlers and shooters. They have a little bit of everything on that team, and not to mention the fact that they have the experience, and not just any experience, a national championship run, and being able to know that they've done it before, win in the tournament, and win in succession in the tournament. A lot of times when you see that happen in the year prior, teams like that come back and start off hot the next season. So that's what I'm expecting this year for them. They're 100% the favorites in the ACC, and hopefully they back that up. Obviously, we say every year, the preseason rankings don't really mean much, but they feel a little bit different this year. They feel like a team that will be there come March, somewhere in the top 5.
Exactly. Let's touch on UCLA real fast. We haven't talked. I mean, we've talked ACC, we've talked SEC, Big 10, Big 12, but we haven't mentioned the Pac-12 yet. We got to give them a little bit of respect, as there are some interesting conversations that we can have at a later date within the Pac-12. I think they're getting overlooked a little bit, but UCLA is, in my eyes, the definite favorite as long as they stay healthy in this conference. Mick Cronin's a proven coach, took this team to the Final Four 2 years ago. Last year they were good in all the metrics. They ranked 10th in KenPom. They dealt with some injuries. They made it to the Sweet 16. They had a pretty successful season, but Jaime Jaquez Jr., who's one of the better wings in college basketball, one of the better shooters in college basketball, battled nagging injuries for much of last year. They were never fully healthy. They never fully gelled together. They were a little bit younger of a team than they were previous years, with that, team that went to the Final Four. Tiger Campbell is about as reliable as you can get at the point guard position. He's a preseason All-American, so we'll see how that plays out. But with those two guys and some of the talent that they were able to bring in via the transfer portal, I think UCLA is bound to make another deep run and probably win the Pac-12 if they stay healthy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. With Campbell as their point guard, I think he's not only a great decision maker, but he knows when to get his and when to get other guys involved. And that's all you can really ask for at the point guard position. I think what he brings to the table will really bode well in terms of their offensive consistency. He knows how to find good looks. He knows how to break down defenses. And, getting those good looks night after night, that's really going to bode well for this team that already has, the foundation and knows how to defend.
Exactly. We're about the 53-minute mark, and we need to get to college football. So we'll just talk about Duke real fast. And we'll probably do more college basketball before the Champions Classic when we get to watch these teams, or maybe after the Champions Classic where we can do some quick takeaways or something like that. But Duke, we talked about their coach, John Shire, and sort of what he needs to do to be successful this year. If you look at their roster, though, well, first of all, as I mentioned before, they had the top recruiting class both this year, next year, and the year after that, as it stands right now. So recruiting and getting the talent to Durham definitely isn't an issue, even without Mike Krzyzewski at the helm. It is the NIL era as well, so that somewhat helps them too. Even though they don't have that namesake coach that everyone's familiar with and knows, they have Mike Krzyzewski, and I'm sure John Shire was involved in a lot of those recruiting efforts as well. So there is familiarity there within that inner circle. Jeremy Roach, very good point guard. He opted to return, so there is a little bit of continuity there. But they just lost a record of 5 NBA picks in a single draft. So there is a lot of younger talent on this roster. Derek Lively II, a 5-star. Kyle Flipkowski, another 5-star. Mark Mitchell, another 5-star. And then a couple other 4-stars as well. So this team, it's all about mending and putting together the young talent. Illinois transfer Jacob Grandison should also provide some experience and some shooting off the bench. But for me, it's all about getting the young talent to eliminate their egos and buy into the system. And if they can do that, the sky's the limit for this roster and Duke. But we've seen young talent younger rosters struggle before in college basketball. If you look at the past couple teams to win the national championship, it's been Baylor, it's been Kansas, it's been Villanova, Virginia. A lot of these programs keep some of this talent around. They have some continuity already with coaches that are experienced. Tony Bennett, Scott Drew, Bill Self, Jay Wright. I mean, it's a trend in college basketball. You can't deny it. So that's really my only concern with Duke. But they certainly have the roster, and I have confidence in John Shire as a coach.
For Duke, I'd really like to see them keep the pace up offensively. A lot of times, with young teams, they don't have the same offensive polish in the half court offense, like ability to get to their spots, understanding of defenses in the same way that, say, a 4-year senior would. So for Duke, I think for them to have success, they need to defend and not just defend, be able to get out and transition, force turnovers, put pressure on ball handlers. And I think that is going to be what leads to easy offense on the other end. With all the talent and athleticism they have, there's no reason for them to, not be aggressive defensively. I think that's where they have to hang their hat, especially early in the season when they're trying to figure out everyone's roles within that offense.
Exactly. Guys, so much more content to come with regards to college basketball. We're at about the hour mark now, so we're going to have to move on to college football. But this is just a start.
Right.
So we will move on. But enjoy.
Yeah, let's move on. I just want to touch on this comment real quick. Walter Mahone says, Walker pissed me off at the World Series game. I don't know who Walker is. I'm confused.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, Walter, if you come back, man, let us know who Walker is. I'm confused. Okay. Anyway, let's move on to college football. Chaos ensued in college football week 10. Let's just say that. Of the top four, the number one Tennessee Volunteers went down to Georgia. The number 4 Clemson Tigers got slapped by Notre Dame. And then other than that, one other interesting upset was Texas over Kansas State. That was a big one in Manhattan as well. That kind of leads into next week's marquee matchup, which will be College Game Day, Texas and TCU in Austin.
They announced that?
I think so.
Oh, shit. Well, if that's the case, woo! Next Saturday is going to be a long day.
Yeah, you'll be there. I know that.
I'll have to confirm that after this podcast. But I do think it's certainly a possibility. I won't be surprised. Now, well, you hit it right on the head. I mean, what an insane day in college football. It seems to never disappoint this year. I think we can talk about some of these over like the next 15, 20 minutes. We can touch on some of these individual games, but I think the bigger conversation that we should have is how are they going to impact? We get another college football playoff rankings on Tuesday night. What will those rankings look like in your eyes? Off the top of my head, I think Georgia after today show that they are the best team in the country. They should be the undisputed number 1, in my opinion. Then I would probably go Ohio State. They did struggle early on in what was a tough weather environment, cold and very windy at Northwestern today against a not so great Northwestern team. They've had some rough starts offensively the past couple weeks, but they've found a way to get the job done. And I still think missing Jackson Smith and Jigma, missing Travion Henderson today, Once they get their full squad back healthy, I still think they're going to run the table until Michigan, and I think they can beat Michigan and win the Big Ten championship game. And with C.J. Stroud, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, I think you have to have confidence still in Ohio State based on how they've improved on defense. Winning some of these games on the back of their defense instead of their offense. And then given the fact that they've dealt with some injuries to key players, particularly Jackson Smith and Jigma, hasn't played a whole lot this year due to his injury. So I'd still put Ohio State at 2. I think I would put, and this is where it gets interesting, with the Bama loss, I think they're out unless something crazy happens over the next couple weeks and we get a bunch of teams losing here and there. But I think Bama for right now is out of the conversation with 2 losses. So I think the conversation then becomes, I think Tennessee, out of the 1-loss teams, has the best loss on the road at the undisputed number 1, Georgia. They did struggle today. I did not expect Georgia to be able to create the pass rush that it did on Hendon Hooker without Nolan Smith. I mean, that was very surprising to me. They came into the game only with 10 sacks, and I believe they ended up with like 6 or 7 sacks today alone without their best player. So, first of all, give credit to Kirby Smart. I mean, what a defensive game plan. Kelly Ringo, fantastic shutdown performance against one of the better receiving cores in college football. I still would put Tennessee at that number 3 spot, given that Bama lost. Unless you want to make an argument for Michigan, who struggled at Rutgers tonight, I think I would put Tennessee still at the number 3 spot, given their resume and given that their only loss was a road loss to Georgia. And then I think the number 4 spot argument really comes down to Michigan and TCU. But I think I'd give the edge to TCU as of right now, given that they're undefeated, and I think they have the better strength of wins competing in this Big 12. So they've beaten 4 or 5 ranked teams so far this season. So I would give it to TCU. I think they deserve the respect with what Sonny Dykes has been able to do. And I have a little bit more confidence that they'll be able to win out rather than Michigan will be, just because they have that Ohio State test. But that's just my opinion. That's how I see it. Other than that, what do you think?
Well, I think for this week, at least, I think Tennessee might move down to 5. But I think the overall outlook is that, obviously Ohio State and Michigan are going to still play each other. So that's going to even itself out, give one of those teams a loss, and then open the door for Tennessee if they're still at 1 loss. So I think for this week, I think you have to put TCU in the 4, whether you put them at 3 or 4. I don't really care. I think most likely they will be at 4. And then at 3, I think, you make a good point. Michigan did struggle today at Rutgers a little bit. But I think they've had some really, statement wins in their big games this year. They obviously blew out Penn State, and that game wasn't as close as the final score let on. They boat raced Penn State. They took care of Iowa, who's, Iowa's a tough place to play every single year, especially with how that defense plays. And at that given point, J.J. McCarthy was making his 2nd career start. So I think Michigan is being a little bit overlooked, but I definitely see where you're coming from in terms of putting Tennessee at 3. I think that would be fair. I think that would probably be the right move. But if we're just predicting what the committee will do for this week, I think Michigan will probably be in that 3 spot.
That's fair enough. I think when you look at Michigan, it's a physical team that I think could end up running the table and even beating up on Ohio State. I think they have the recipe to do it. J.J. McCarthy improving week to week in the passing game. And Blake Corum, after like maybe Bijan Robinson and a couple other guys, I mean, he's in that group of the elite, the cream of the crop when it comes to running backs in college football. But for me, the thing is, if anything were to happen to Blake Corum, that's a huge part of their offense, and I'm just not sure. I don't wish this on Blake Corum. I'm not like hoping for an injury. It's not what I'm saying. It's just for me, it feels like they're a little bit at some points in times could be a too reliant on the running game and Blake Corum. And if teams find a way to stop that, I'm just not sure. I haven't seen it yet. We'll see at Ohio State here in a couple weeks. But that Penn State win is what they're holding on to right now. And it's, of course, as Joel Klatt pointed out, not easy to win on the road in college football, no matter where it is. So you got to give them credit for winning the games in front of them. And if they're put in the top four, it's certainly deserving. I'm just not sure we're going to see a scenario where they have two. Well, I guess it wouldn't be. I think the three locks are Georgia, Ohio State, and TCU.
Right.
And then the last spot comes down to Tennessee or Michigan. I'm giving Tennessee the benefit of the doubt right now because I think their strength of wins is better than Michigan's, but you can certainly see where you're coming from. And that for this week, and this week only, knowing that the situation is going to sort itself out here in a couple of weeks, they put Michigan in that spot.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's worth noting Oregon is also sitting there on a bye week with one loss, that being to Georgia as well. I don't think, obviously, they're not in the discussion to be in the four right now, but I think they are a team that they don't necessarily control their own destiny, but I think if they do win out, they have as good a case as anyone to get back into the playoff. With the level of football they're playing right now, I think with the likelihood that they would have to beat a USC in the Pac-12 title game, whether it be USC or possibly a Utah if USC happens to lose again or whatever the case may be, I think Oregon definitely has a case if they remain at one loss.
Yeah, I wanted to look at Oregon's schedule real fast to finish up because they're also a team that right now, I mean, Bo Nix is probably playing outside of maybe like Max Duggan and some of the top-notch Heisman candidates, probably playing the best, most consistent football we've seen from a quarterback in college football. I mean, he's being that good, and it's clear to see like Oregon has the talent, I think, to compete this year, especially up front on that offensive line and on that defensive line. I mean, they just look different than any other team in the Pac-12 in the trenches, aside from maybe Utah. And they have a quarterback right now that is on fire, and they're playing well. And give credit to Dan Lanning; he's been a booming success as a new coach coming over from Georgia, installing his principles. That's been great to see, and it'd be great to get the Pac-12 back in the national championship picture in the college football playoff. If you look at what Oregon has, though, home game against Washington, a good Washington football team that's unranked, but they just won on the road at Oregon State. They might be back in the rankings this upcoming week. I mean, I think Oregon would be favored, and they'll probably win that game. But Washington's a good football team; you can't overlook them. And then you welcome in Utah, which is in 2 weeks, which is going to be by far your biggest game left on the schedule if you want to get into that Pac-12 championship game. And then to finish off, you go on the road to a good Oregon State team. And it's not easy to win on the road in college football, and that's a rivalry game. So that makes it even tougher. So Oregon, yes, they're playing great. I think they're going to move up in this week's rankings, given that Bama lost, Tennessee lost as well. I think they deserve.
Well,
Yeah, I think they deserve to move up, but that is a tough schedule. So I'm sort of in a wait and see approach with Oregon, but I certainly think they do have a shot if they can win out. They're an interesting team. They're like that team on the outside looking in right now. That's sort of on the periphery, not quite in the conversation yet, but you got to watch out for them.
right. And let's talk about OSU for a second, because they have the opportunity to really flip the entire SEC on its head. Um, if you look at, if they win out the rest of the way, they win the SEC West. So if they somehow win out, obviously going to Ole Miss next week, I believe, and then whatever the opponents are after that, and then get to the SEC title game, and then assuming that would be Georgia, based on that win today, I think LSU really just came out of nowhere, in my opinion. That, like, after the first few weeks of the year, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wrote them off. They kind of went under the radar. They won, I think, 5 out of 6 games, I believe, something like that, and they're playing really good football.
I expect LSU to win out. Going on the road at Arkansas next week, it's actually Alabama that has to go on the road to Ole Miss.
Oh, right, that's what I was thinking of. Right.
So yes, I think if you're LSU, at Arkansas, Arkansas team that's really struggling and this year under Sam Pittman, they're one of my bigger disappointments, honestly, this year in college football. I thought they would be the Tennessee of this year per se, in that not that they would be like Tennessee in that they'd be scoring this many points and they'd be up in the top 4 of the college football playoff rankings, but I thought they would be that next best team in the SEC that would have 9-10 win season, get to a New Year's Six bowl, be in the national conversation, like on the periphery, like Oregon is. I thought they'd be that team, but they just haven't been, and they lost to Liberty today. So that tells you everything you need to know about the state of Arkansas. But Liberty's they're a good team. I shouldn't say that. Hugh Freeze, he's a really good coach, and he'll probably get hired for a bigger job this upcoming coaching cycle. But still, if you're Arkansas, with the momentum that you're building, you shouldn't be losing to Liberty. But I digress. I think LSU, the way they're playing, should win that game. You host UAB, you win that game, and then you go on the road to A&M, the last game of the season. An A&M team that's a disaster, a tire fire right now. So you should win that game as well. I do think LSU will be favored in all 3 of those games, possibly heavily in all 3 of those games. And I think the way they're playing, they win out. And as a 2-loss team that gets to the SEC championship game, that's an interesting conversation to have. But the loss that really is going to kill them is that Florida State loss at the very beginning of the season. That should have never happened.
Right.
They should have won that game. But it's year 1 under Brian Kelly, and I think if you get to where are they at? 10 wins in year 1 under Brian Kelly, I think that exceeds everybody's expectations that they had coming in. With Brian Kelly year 1, still trying to get the talent that he needs, his guys into the program. But it's really just a takeoff point for this program. And LSU sort of recruits itself within the state of Louisiana. That's a fertile recruiting base, if you will, just
Right.
in that state. So this momentum continues. Now that you got that win over Alabama, you You have some other impressive wins this year, including going to Ole Miss and beating them down. An Ole Miss team that you're in competition with now in that SEC West, given that, you know, you already beat them and Bama is sort of at this point out of the picture right now. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, but I do think given that you already lost to Tennessee, and there's another, you know, 1-2 loss team in the SEC, it would be tough to get them in the playoff at this point, but certainly a really good season for Brian Kelly and LSU.
Right. And not one I was expecting, for sure. I guess that kind of leads straight into that game. I just want to touch on that game real quick. It goes into overtime. Tied at, what was it? I believe it was 24-24.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was working at the liquor store at the time, so I didn't catch all of overtime. But from what I did see, um, obviously you had that tipped pass interference that wasn't overturned. Alabama gets to the 2 yard line and then they score. Um, and then I was like, wow, like Alabama might end up getting out of this. But then immediately LSU comes back, has that long touchdown run. Um, and then from there, LSU just had the momentum. That well, from there they had it in their hands basically. They went for two and they just said, let's end it. They didn't want another, LSU A&M situation. So they did the right thing. They had nothing to lose. Well, they did have something to lose, but the point, they were the underdogs, and it made sense to go for the win. Is the point, and they got it done.
I think the mindset was simple. The more chances you give Bryce Young, the worse it can get. Like, it's only going to get worse at that point.
Right.
Like, he's Mr. Houdini with some of the things he's able to do. We know why he won the Heisman last year. And I don't think you were going to end up stopping him, especially in that overtime situation. So I think LSU, the mindset is be aggressive. You're sort of playing in a way with house money in year one under Brian Kelly. Let's go for it now. Let's show these recruits that they had on campus tonight in a big sort of environment, recruiting game for LSU, that we're going to be aggressive and we're going to go for the throat when it matters. And they did that. Huge win for LSU, their first win over Bama at home, I think like 12 years since 2010. So they did beat Bama back with Joe Burrow, obviously, on the road in Tuscaloosa. We all remember that regular season game.
Yep.
They had not beaten them in Death Valley since 2010. So that's a huge win for LSU.
Yeah, crucial. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on here?
I guess I'll touch a little bit on Texas. Big road win for Sark.
Pause. Sorry.
Huge, absolutely huge road win for Sark. And now for Texas, 2 losses in the Big 12, both of which should never happen for obvious reasons. But 2 losses in the Big 12, and you look at, aside from TCU, which is at the top of the conference, undefeated, coming to Austin next week, by the way, what will be a huge game that we'll talk about this week. You control your own destiny now. If you win out, you're likely in the Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma State is falling apart. They beat Texas, but they seem to be falling apart. Back-to-back blowout losses. Spencer Sanders isn't healthy. Doesn't look very good. It's not looking very good for Oklahoma State. Still have to go, they still have their rivalry game at the end of the season with Oklahoma. And the Big 12 is no, easy league this year on a week-to-week basis, test after test. And the way that's trending, they're not trending in the right direction. Who knows? Maybe they right the ship and they get in. But the way it's looking, I don't think so. K-State, huge win over Oklahoma State last week. End up, making this game more interesting than it should have been, of course, with Texas' second half offensive woes that, for whatever reason, just seem to continue. But we'll talk about that another day. They were able to make the play defensively today on the final drive. Actually, they forced like 3 fumbles that final drive, and they were only able to recover one of them, which was the last one. But I was I was going crazy. Like, how can you not recover these fumbles? They kept forcing the fumbles, and then they couldn't recover the fumbles. It was and I'm a diehard Texas fan, but it was some Texas shit if you ever seen Texas shit before. Like, that was just classical. Like, oh yeah, we know how this is going to end, but it ended up ending in a happy way, not a sad way. So that's what we're here to talk about. And Quentin Ewers definitely played better in his second ever road start in conference. Definitely see there was a level of comfortable. I can't even say the word. He was more comfortable. Yes. Had a couple cocktails, ladies and gentlemen. He was definitely more comfortable. And Bijan Robinson, I mean, give the ball to your best player, and they won the game.
Yeah, I mean, I caught bits and pieces of that game because I was switching from between 3 different games during the night cappers, the World Series, this game, and then obviously Alabama LSU. So I probably caught the least of this game out of the 3. But one thing I will say is, if you lost this game, you would just be left scratching your head with this offense because it's not like they were doing anything different. It just wasn't clicking the same. And obviously, winning cures all, and we don't have to ask those questions on a Sunday morning in Austin anymore. But those fears still linger even with the win. Going next week, a good spot. The defense is doing well for the most part this year. So now I think next week it all comes down to offensive consistency. Can you put up the add amount of points to take down a TCU? Because we all know TCU is going to get theirs. They've shown that over and over and over again. Max Duggan is going to, find ways to put points on the board.
Yeah, we'll preview that game later this week.
I got ahead of myself there.
No, it's all good. We're going to be diving into that. There are some other interesting games next week as well. I believe Bama goes to Ole Miss, and at this point, that's sort of it's an important game for both teams, but it could be more important now for Ole Miss than it is for Bama, just in terms of college football playoff discussions. Because if you look at Ole Miss right now, their only loss was to now what should be like a top 8 ranked, top 7 ranked LSU team that's playing one of the best brands of football in the country right now. So they still could potentially, with some chaos that ensues, have a path towards maybe the college football playoffs. So that's an important game that we'll talk about. And then there are a couple others on the periphery and a loaded NFL slate also next weekend. But we haven't even gotten to this weekend's NFL slate. If you haven't yet, tomorrow morning, go listen to our picks pod to hear our picks on the NFL for this week. Listen to this pod, share it with your friends. And we're hoping to do another episode before picks pod, which would be like an NFL midseason tiers or something along those lines, but we're not sure if that will happen yet. So if we don't do that, we'll do it soon, and we'll be back to the picks pod on Wednesday or Thursday, most likely.
Yeah. Go ahead and sign us off.
It's just like Bama's chances of making the college football playoff. Probably. We are going.
Peace out.